If you've ever wanted to see what happens when someone fixes your house while you're gone and then gets a reality check that could be seen from space, smash that like button. Drop a comment if you've ever come home to find your property improved by people who thought they were doing you a favor. Welcome home to Wonderland, population, insanity. There's nothing quite like coming home from a 2-week business trip to find that your house has been upgraded by people who apparently think beige is a personality trait and that wooden lawn ornaments are the height of suburban sophistication. I should have known something was wrong when I turned onto Maple Lane and saw Mrs. Peterson from 3 houses down watering her petunias with the kind of frantic energy usually reserved for putting out fires. She looked up as my car approached, and I swear her face went through more expressions than a bad actor in a community theater production of Hamlet. First came recognition, then what looked like panic, followed by something that might have been pity, and finally settling on the kind of grimace people make when they're about to deliver news that nobody wants to hear. She gave me a little wave that looked more like a surrender flag than a greeting. The first sign that my peaceful suburban existence had been thoroughly violated came when I pulled into my driveway and noticed that my front yard looked like it had been attacked by a team of landscapers who'd gotten their design inspiration from a retirement home catalog circa 1987. Where my carefully maintained flower beds used to showcase a mix of seasonal blooms that actually required some botanical knowledge to arrange, there was now a collection of what appeared to be plastic flamingos, ceramic gnomes, and enough decorative windmills to power a small village. The whole display looked like someone had robbed a lawn ornament store and then vomited the contents across my property. But that was just the appetizer for the main course of suburban horror that awaited me. My front door, which I'd painted a sophisticated deep blue that complemented the house's natural stone facade, was now a shade of yellow that could probably be seen from the International Space Station. It wasn't just yellow, it was the kind of aggressive, eye-searing yellow that makes school buses look subtle. Attached to this beacon of bad taste was a wreath that appeared to have been constructed from artificial flowers, plastic fruit, and what looked suspiciously like miniature American flags. The whole thing was topped with a bow that was larger than some small cars and had apparently been designed by someone who thought subtlety was a foreign concept. I sat in my car for a full minute, staring at my house like it was a crime scene, which, in a way, it was. Someone had committed aesthetic murder, and the victim was my property value. That's when I noticed the note, tucked under my doormat, which had also been replaced with one that proclaimed, "Bless this mess," in letters large enough to be read from orbit, was an envelope with my name written in the kind of loopy handwriting that belongs to people who hoot their eyes with hearts and think Comic Sans is an acceptable font choice. Inside was a letter written on HOA letterhead, signed with a flourish that suggested the author thought they were signing the Declaration of Independence rather than explaining why they'd turned my house into a suburban nightmare. Dear Mr. Johnson, it began, "Welcome home." As HOA president, I took the liberty of bringing your property into compliance with our new enhanced community beautification standards while you were away. I'm sure you'll agree that these improvements represent a significant upgrade to your home's curb appeal and neighborhood harmony. The total cost of materials and labor comes to $3,847.82, payable within 30 days. Thank you for your cooperation in making our community more beautiful. Warmly, Margaret Henderson, HOA President and Neighborhood Beautification Coordinator. I read the letter twice, then a third time, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. When that didn't happen, I got out of my car and walked toward my front door, stepping carefully around a new garden gnome that appeared to be mooning anyone approaching from the street. The closer I got to my house, the more details emerged from what I was beginning to think of as the great aesthetic disaster of Maple Lane. My shutters, which had been a tasteful forest green, were now painted to match the door, that same radioactive yellow that hurt to look at directly. My mailbox had been wrapped in some kind of decorative covering that made it look like a present no one wanted to unwrap. But the real masterpiece was my front porch. Someone, and I was developing a pretty good idea who, had installed a collection of wind chimes that created a cacophony of noise every time the breeze picked up. There were at least 6 different sets, each one apparently tuned to a different key, creating a symphony of suburban chaos that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. The porch furniture I'd carefully selected, simple, elegant pieces that complemented the house's architecture, had been replaced with what appeared to be a complete set of white plastic lawn furniture. The kind you see at gas stations and discount stores, with resin molded into the arms in case anyone forgot what they were made of. I stood there, key in hand, staring at my transformed home and trying to process the fact that someone had apparently decided that my 2-week absence was the perfect opportunity to inflict their vision of suburban beauty on my property. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Oh, you're back." I turned around to see Margaret Henderson herself, approaching from across the street with the kind of confident stride that belongs to people who've just done something they're absolutely certain you'll thank them for. She was wearing what appeared to be a full gardening ensemble from some high-end catalog, the kind of outfit that costs more than most people's monthly grocery budget, but looks like it's never actually seen dirt. Her smile was the kind of wide, bright expression that usually precedes really bad news. "I was hoping I'd be here when you got home," she continued, gesturing toward my house like she was presenting a prize on a game show. "I wanted to see your reaction to all the improvements." I looked at her, then at my house, then back at her, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate practical joke or if I'd accidentally driven to the wrong address and was staring at someone else's suburban nightmare. "Improvements," I repeated, testing the word to see if it would make more sense the second time around. It didn't. Margaret's smile could have powered a small city, and unfortunately for me, it was currently being directed at what used to be my tastefully appointed home and was now apparently the unofficial headquarters of the Suburban Tackiness Liberation Front. "I know you're probably overwhelmed," she said, clasping her hands together like she was about to break into song. "But wait until you see the inside." The inside. Of course, there was an inside component to this aesthetic apocalypse. "You went inside my house?" I asked, my voice carrying the kind of calm that usually precedes either deep meditation or violent crime. "Oh, don't worry. I have the spare key you gave the HOA for emergencies," she chirped, producing said key from her pocket like it was evidence of her thoughtfulness rather than proof of breaking and entering. "And this definitely qualified as an emergency. Your interior design was so dated." Dated? My interior design, which I'd spent 3 years carefully curating with the help of an actual professional, was apparently dated. According to a woman whose idea of sophisticated home decor included lawn gnomes that mooned the neighbors. "Margaret," I said, testing her name to make sure it still felt like a real word and not some cosmic joke. "Did you just say you went into my house while I was gone and redecorated?" "Enhanced," she corrected, her enthusiasm undimmed by what I was pretty sure was the sound of my blood pressure spiking. "I brought everything into compliance with the new HOA aesthetic guidelines. You're going to love what we did with your living room." The way she said "we" made my eye twitch. This wasn't a solo operation. Margaret had accomplices. Against my better judgment, and really, at this point, what was left of my judgment was hanging on by a thread anyway. I followed her up my newly yellow front steps, past the wind chime orchestra, and through my front door. If the outside of my house was a crime against good taste, the inside was what happened when that crime had babies and raised them wrong. My living room, which had featured a carefully chosen color palette of warm grays and deep blues with tasteful artwork and furniture that actual adults might want to sit on, now looked like a country craft fair had exploded in a fireworks factory. The walls, which had been painted a sophisticated dove gray, were now covered in wallpaper that featured roosters. Not stylized roosters. Not artistic interpretations of roosters. Actual, full-color photographs of roosters, repeated in a pattern that made my eyes water just looking at it. My furniture, a leather sofa and matching chairs that I'd saved for months to afford, was gone. In its place sat what appeared to be a complete living room set from the Colonial Americana collection at some discount furniture warehouse. Everything was upholstered in a fabric that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought the appropriate response to "what color should this be?" was yes. "Isn't it wonderful?" Margaret gushed, spreading her arms like she was presenting a prize. "I found this furniture set on sale, 50% off." and I just knew it would be perfect for your space. Where's my furniture? I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant, like it was coming from someone else's throat. Oh, we donated it, she said with the casual tone people use to discuss the weather. It was so dark and modern. This is much more cheerful, don't you think? Cheerful. Right. The kind of cheerful that makes you want to check yourself into a sensory deprivation chamber for about 6 months. But Margaret wasn't done with her tour of destruction. Come see the kitchen, she said, grabbing my arm with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered fire. We did amazing things with your kitchen. The kitchen. Oh, sweet merciful universe, the kitchen. My kitchen had been my pride and joy, sleek stainless steel appliances, granite countertops, and a color scheme that whispered sophistication rather than screaming suburban mom block. It had been a space where actual cooking could happen, where you could imagine preparing meals that didn't come from a box. That kitchen was gone. In its place was what appeared to be the set from a 1950s sitcom. If that sitcom had been produced by people who thought subtlety was a character flaw. Every surface that could be covered in roosters had been covered in roosters. Rooster wallpaper, rooster curtains, rooster placemats, rooster salt and pepper shakers, and what appeared to be a rooster-shaped cookie jar that was approximately the size of a small child. My stainless steel appliances had been covered, actually covered, with contact paper designed to look like wood grain. Not good wood grain. The kind of wood grain that looks like it was drawn by someone who'd heard wood described to them once, but had never actually seen any. The roosters tie everything together, Margaret explained, apparently interpreting my stunned silence as speechless appreciation. I thought about going with a cow theme, but roosters felt more me. Roosters felt more me. I was starting to understand how people ended up on the evening news. Margaret, I said, my voice carrying the kind of carefully controlled calm that hostage negotiators learn in training. How much did you say this cost? Oh, just $3,847.82, she said brightly. And that's including my labor. I charged my usual consulting fee, but I gave you the neighbor discount. Her usual consulting fee. Margaret Henderson, who had just turned my house into the love child of a country craft store and a poultry farm, had a consulting fee. What consulting fee would that be? I asked. For interior design, she said, looking genuinely puzzled that I would need to ask. I've been featured in the HOA newsletter 3 times for my decorating tips. The HOA newsletter. Of course. The same newsletter that once ran a 2-page spread on the proper way to arrange garden hoses and featured a recipe section that was mostly variations on casseroles involving cream of mushroom soup. I looked around my kitchen one more time, taking in the full scope of the aesthetic disaster that had befallen my home. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the wind chimes creating their discordant symphony, and I realized that this was just the beginning. Margaret was still talking, something about how she'd also improved my bedroom and bathroom, but the words were starting to blend together into a kind of suburban white noise that made about as much sense as the rooster wallpaper. That's when I noticed the invoice sitting on my counter, itemized and professional looking, like this was all perfectly normal. Like people just broke into your house, redecorated it with poultry-themed nightmare fuel, and then charged you for the privilege. I picked up the invoice and started reading, and that's when I realized that Margaret Henderson's reign of aesthetic terror was about to become very, very expensive for someone. Just not for me. The invoice sitting on my counter looked official enough to fool someone who'd never seen an actual professional service bill, complete with letterhead that read, Henderson Home Harmony, Interior Design Solutions, and a logo that appeared to be a rooster wearing a tiny hard hat. I scanned the itemized list with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for car accidents and reality TV shows. Wallpaper removal and installation, $847. Furniture disposal and replacement, $1,245. Kitchen enhancement package, $623.50. Decorative accessory curation, $389.32. Design consultation and project management, $743. Each line item was followed by a detailed description that read like it had been written by someone who'd learned English from Home Shopping Network commercials. Wallpaper removal and installation had apparently involved carefully removing outdated wall treatments and installing cheerful Rooster-themed designer wallpaper to enhance room ambience and community compliance. Community compliance. That was rich. Margaret, I said, setting down the invoice and turning to face her with the kind of smile that makes smart people take a step backward. I need you to explain something to me. Of course, she beamed, apparently interpreting my expression as delighted confusion rather than the barely contained fury it actually was. I know it's a lot to take in all at once. Who authorized this work? The question seemed to catch her off guard, like I'd asked her to explain quantum physics using only interpretive dance. Authorized, she repeated, her smile flickering slightly. Yes, authorized. As in, who gave you permission to enter my house and do all this? Well, nobody specifically, she said, her voice developing the kind of uncertainty that people get when they're starting to realize they might have made a tiny miscalculation. But the HOA has the authority to bring properties into compliance with community standards. Show me. Show you what? Show me where in the HOA bylaws it says you can break into someone's house and redecorate it. Margaret's smile was starting to look less confident and more like the expression people wear when they're trying to remember if they locked their car. It's not breaking in if I have a key. Margaret, the emergency key is for emergencies. Water leaks, fires, medical situations. Not for giving my living room a Rooster makeover. But your house wasn't in compliance. With what standards? I interrupted, my voice still carrying that dangerous calm that makes lawyers rich and defendants nervous. Show me the specific regulation that says my gray walls were illegal. She fumbled in her purse and produced a folder thick enough to stop small-caliber bullets. The enhanced community beautification standards were approved at the last board meeting, which I wasn't notified about. You were out of town, so you held a meeting while I was gone, passed new standards I couldn't vote on, and then used those standards to justify redecorating my house without permission? The way Margaret's face went through various shades of confusion was like watching a slow-motion car crash. If the car was her confidence, and the wall was basic property law. I was improving your home, she said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier enthusiasm. Margaret, do you know what trespassing is? I had a key. Do you know what destruction of property is? I was improving. Do you know what fraud is? That one stopped her cold. For the first time since I'd arrived home, Margaret Henderson wasn't talking. Fraud, I continued, picking up the invoice again, is when you provide services that nobody asked for and then demand payment for them. It's also when you use a position of authority to justify actions that are actually crimes. Crimes. The word came out as a squeak. Margaret, you broke into my house, destroyed my property, and are trying to charge me for the privilege. That's breaking and entering, destruction of property, and fraud. Those are crimes. The color had started draining from her face like someone had pulled a plug. But I was helping. You were helping yourself to my house and my wallet, I said. Did you keep receipts for all this stuff? She nodded weakly, producing another folder from her purse. I flipped through the receipts, doing quick math in my head. Hardware store, discount furniture warehouse, craft supply store, more hardware store. The total came to about $1,200 in actual purchases. So you spent $1,200 and charged me $3,800, I observed. That's quite a markup. My time is valuable. Your time is criminal, I corrected. Margaret, you've committed several felonies, and now you're trying to extort money from me to pay for them. The word felonies seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward, bumping into my new Rooster-themed kitchen island. I was just trying to help, she whispered. No, you were trying to play house with someone else's house and then get paid for it, I said. But here's what's going to happen instead. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. First, I'm going to document every single thing you've done to my house. Every rooster, every piece of furniture, every assault on good taste. She watched in growing horror as I started taking pictures, methodically recording the evidence of her interior design crime spree. Then, I continued, moving from the kitchen to the living room while keeping the camera rolling. I'm going to call the police and report a break-in. Because that's what this is, a break-in where the intruder happened to leave behind a bunch of ugly furniture instead of taking my TV. You can't be serious, Margaret said, but her voice suggested she was starting to realize that I absolutely could be. After that, I'm calling my insurance company to file a claim for the damage to my property. Then I'm calling my lawyer to discuss civil suits for trespassing, destruction of property, and fraud. Each word seemed to hit her like a small hammer. By the time I finished, she looked like someone who'd just realized they'd been playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. But I was elected HOA president, she stammered, like that was some kind of magical protection against consequences. Margaret, I said, pausing my documentation to look at her directly. Being elected HOA president doesn't make you above the law. It just makes you the elected criminal. That's when she started crying. Not the dignified tears of someone who'd made an honest mistake, but the ugly, desperate sobbing of someone who was finally beginning to understand just how spectacularly they'd screwed up. And honestly, it was the most beautiful sound I'd heard all day. Margaret's tears were just the opening act for what turned into the greatest show on Maple Lane since Mr. Peterson accidentally drove his riding mower into his own koi pond. Word travels fast in suburban neighborhoods, especially when that word involves HOA presidents having public breakdowns in someone's Rooster-themed kitchen. By the time the police arrived, and yes, I absolutely called them, half the neighborhood was gathered on my lawn like it was the world's most bizarre block party. Officer Martinez took one look at my living room and got the expression cops get when they realized their shift just took a hard left turn into crazy town. So let me get this straight, he said, notepad in hand, standing next to a ceramic rooster the size of a small dog. The HOA president broke into your house while you were gone and redecorated it. With roosters, I confirmed. Lots of roosters. Officer Martinez looked around my living room, taking in the wallpaper, the furniture, and what appeared to be a rooster-shaped lamp that I was pretty sure hadn't been there when I left for my trip. Ma'am, he said, turning to Margaret, who was still crying but had upgraded to the kind of hiccuping sobs that suggest someone is having a complete emotional breakdown. Is this accurate? I was improving the property, Margaret managed between sobs. For community standards. Community standards require roosters? Officer Martinez asked, and I could tell he was struggling not to smile. That's when Mrs. Chun from next door stepped forward. Mrs. Chun, who usually minded her own business and had never said more than 3 words to me in the 5 years I'd lived here, cleared her throat with the authority of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Officer, I have security camera footage of Mrs. Henderson entering this house multiple times over the past week, she announced, including bringing in furniture and contractors. Margaret's sobbing stopped abruptly. You were spying on me? I was protecting my property, Mrs. Chun replied coolly. After you tried to improve my rose bushes last month without permission. This was news to me. She did what to your roses? Painted them, Mrs. Chun said matter-of-factly. With spray paint. To make them more colorful. Officer Martinez wrote something in his notepad that looked like it might have been what the hell in official police shorthand. Ma'am, he said to Margaret, did you have permission to enter this residence? I had a key. That's not permission, that's access. Officer Martinez explained patiently. Having a key doesn't give you the right to redecorate someone's house. That's when Dave Peterson, not to be confused with the koi pond Peterson, decided to add his 2 cents to the circus. She charged the Johnsons for roof cleaning too, he announced to the growing crowd, while they were visiting their daughter. Except she didn't clean the roof. She just pressure washed it and damaged half their shingles. More murmurs from the crowd. Apparently, Margaret's reign of improvement had been more extensive than I'd realized. And that's when the crowd really started talking. Apparently, Margaret had been running a one-woman campaign of suburban terrorism for months, and everyone had been too polite or too intimidated to say anything. The list of her improvements was staggering. Unauthorized landscaping, unsolicited exterior painting, illegal entry into multiple homes, destruction of property, and what appeared to be a small-scale extortion ring involving trumped-up HOA fines. How many houses? Officer Martinez asked the crowd. Hands started going up. 7 houses. 7 homeowners who had been victimized by Margaret's vision of community improvement. Ma'am, Officer Martinez said to Margaret, who was now sitting on my new Rooster-themed love seat looking like she'd just realized she was on the Titanic and all the lifeboats were full. You're under arrest. The sound she made was like a balloon animal being slowly deflated by a very sad clown. As they led her away, past the wind chimes, past the yellow door, past the garden gnomes that were apparently witnesses to multiple crimes, Margaret looked back at me with the expression of someone who'd just learned that actions have consequences and that those consequences can involve handcuffs. I was just trying to make the neighborhood beautiful, she called out as Officer Martinez guided her toward the patrol car. Mission accomplished, I called back. Now, without you, it's never looked better. The crowd dispersed slowly, neighbors stopping to introduce themselves properly for the first time in years and to share their own Margaret Henderson horror stories. Apparently, she'd been democratically elected HOA president in an election where she was the only candidate, which should have been the first red flag. Mrs. Chin lingered after everyone else had gone home. I have video of everything, she said quietly. Every time she entered your house, every piece of furniture she brought in, every contractor she hired without permission. Why didn't you call the police? She shrugged. I wanted to see how far she'd go. Besides, she added with a small smile, I figured you'd handle it better than I would have. As the sun set over Maple Lane, I stood in my driveway looking at my transformed house and contemplating the cleanup ahead. The roosters would have to go. The yellow door would need repainting. The furniture would have to be replaced. But first, I had some phone calls to make. My insurance company was going to love this claim. My lawyer was going to have the time of his life. And the local news was probably going to have a field day with the story of the HOA president who turned breaking and entering into an extreme home makeover. Sometimes justice comes with a gavel. Sometimes it comes with handcuffs. And sometimes it comes with security camera footage and a neighborhood full of people who've been waiting for someone to finally say enough. Margaret Henderson's reign of terror was over. Her empire of roosters and spray-painted roses had fallen. Now came the fun part, making her pay for it. 3 months later, I was sitting on my front porch, which was once again painted a tasteful blue and mercifully free of wind chimes, reading the newspaper article about Margaret Henderson's sentencing when my phone rang. Mr. Johnson, this is Janet from Harmony Insurance. I'm calling about your claim settlement. I've been waiting for this call. Insurance companies don't typically rush to pay out claims involving unauthorized interior design terrorism, as my adjuster had described it. But Mrs. Chin's security footage had been remarkably persuasive. The total settlement amount is $47,623, Janet continued cheerfully. That covers the cost to restore your home to its original condition, replacement of all damaged items, and additional compensation for the diminished property value caused by the roosters. $47,000. Margaret's little improvement project had cost her nearly $50,000, not including the legal fees, fines, and the small matter of her criminal conviction for breaking and entering, destruction of property, and fraud. The criminal trial had been a thing of beauty. Margaret had apparently believed that representing herself was a good idea, which led to her spending 20 minutes trying to explain to a judge why roosters were essential to community harmony and why homeowners should be grateful for unsolicited redecorating. The judge, a distinguished woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen every possible variation of human stupidity, had listened with the kind of patience usually reserved for small children and people having mental health crises. Mrs. Henderson, she'd finally said, you broke into 7 houses and caused over $200,000 in damage. The fact that you think you were helping is not a legal defense. Margaret had gotten 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and a permanent restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of any HOA property. The neighborhood had collectively breathed a sigh of relief, so profound it probably registered on seismic equipment. But the real satisfaction had come during the civil trial, where I'd sued her for damages, emotional distress, and what my lawyer had creatively termed aesthetic assault. The jury had taken exactly 43 minutes to find in my favor. 43 minutes to award me enough money to not only restore my house, but also to take a very nice vacation to forget about the trauma of living in a rooster-themed nightmare. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd spent most of the trial trying not to laugh at the photos of Margaret's improvements, had called it the most satisfying property case of her career. I've never seen someone destroy their own life so thoroughly with home decor, she told me afterward. It's almost artistic. The other 6 homeowners had filed their own suits, creating a legal avalanche that had buried Margaret's finances deeper than her aesthetic sense. Last I heard, she was working in the prison laundry to pay off court-ordered restitution. Mrs. Chun had become something of a neighborhood celebrity for her surveillance footage, which had been featured on local news as the Great HOA Conspiracy. She'd parlayed her 15 minutes of fame into a small security consulting business, helping other homeowners protect themselves from overzealous community leaders. The HOA had dissolved entirely after Margaret's arrest. Apparently, when your president is convicted of multiple felonies, it tends to undermine confidence in the organization. The neighborhood had voted to form a new, much smaller association with strictly limited powers and a constitution that specifically prohibited unsolicited home improvements. Dave Peterson, who'd been Margaret's vice president and had somehow avoided criminal charges by claiming ignorance of her activities, had moved away quietly. Rumor had it he joined a retirement community in Arizona where all the houses were required to be identical shades of beige, which probably suited him perfectly. My house had been restored to its original condition, and then some. The insurance money had allowed me to upgrade everything Margaret had touched, plus add some security features that would ensure no one could ever again turn my home into a poultry-themed fever dream. I'd kept one thing from Margaret's makeover, a single ceramic rooster that now sat on my kitchen windowsill. Not because I developed any appreciation for her decorating style, but because it served as a daily reminder that sometimes the best defense against crazy is simply letting crazy destroy itself. The rooster also made for great dinner party conversation. That, I'd tell guests, is a $47,000 chicken. As I finished reading the newspaper article about Margaret's sentencing, which included a sidebar about the rise in home security system sales following the Great Maple Lane incident, my neighbor Mrs. Chun waved from her garden. "How's the infamous rooster?" she called out. "Still worth more than my car," I called back. She laughed and went back to her roses, which were now their natural color and protected by the most comprehensive security system in the county. The afternoon was peaceful, quiet, and blissfully free of wind chimes. My house was once again my own, painted in colors I'd chosen and furnished with items I'd selected. But the real victory wasn't financial or legal. It was the simple satisfaction of watching someone who'd thought they could run roughshod over other people's lives discover that actions have consequences, and that sometimes those consequences come with a criminal record and a bankruptcy filing. Margaret Henderson had set out to improve the neighborhood. In a way, she'd succeeded. By removing herself from it, the neighborhood was definitely more beautiful without her in it. And my house? Well, my house was exactly the way I wanted it. Rooster-free and magnificent. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just sweet. Sometimes it came with a side of poetic irony and a hefty insurance settlement. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to karma, consequences, and the therapeutic value of watching bullies get exactly what they deserve. Then I went inside to enjoy my perfectly decorated, completely rooster-free home. Some victories are worth savoring. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.